Good afternoon guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a lovely Sunday. I thought I'd start my video somewhere different rather than being sat on my sofa or at my desk. I'm out in the woods on this lovely grey horse. However, typical, it is technically the start of winter and it's a very wintry British day. It is grey, it is windy, it is cold and it's drizzling. Standard, very standard, isn't it? So I thought, it'd be nice to start it somewhere different, but the problem is the wind noise in the background is going to make this horrible start to the video, so I'm going to have to keep it very short and then we're going to have to go inside. So today's video is on Thomas Tilling, who I've actually mentioned quite a few times in my videos, especially the one about the horse-drawn omnibuses and the recent one on the horses that pulled the fire engines. This man was such an entrepreneur, a great businessman, and what he achieved was really unbelievable. So let me tell you a bit more about him. Thomas Tilling was an important figure in London transport in the second half of the 1800s. He was the largest supplier of horsepower in the city, which is quite something. Thomas Tilling was born in 1825 on the family dairy farm. As a young man, he was a cow worker, which was to be expected growing up on a dairy farm. However, Thomas Tilling had big ambitions. In 1846, aged 21, he married Cornelia Searle, who was the daughter of a dairy farmer. Just a year later, Thomas, Cornelia, his grey mare Kitty, moved to Walworth, South London. Thomas invested £30 into purchasing a carriage, which he then started hiring out with his services for weddings and other functions. Kitty had actually started out as a gentleman's hunter. Once Thomas had saved enough money, he bought another grey mare called Carrie, and after that another 3 grey horses, so his business was growing. However, disaster struck when all 5 horses died from a disease. If it wasn't for Thomas's fodder supplier lending him money, then this would have no doubt been a very different story. But with the borrowed money, Thomas replaced the horses and purchased his first horse-drawn bus. In 1851, Thomas started running journeys between Peckham and Oxford Street. He drove the omnibus and hired a conductor. His first conductor was Joseph Eagle, who ended up working for Thomas for over 40 years. 6 years later, Thomas Tilling now owned 70 horses, which he was using for his omnibuses and his carriage work. He began running his ever-growing business from the parlour at Winchester House, Peckham. The reasons Thomas's omnibus business was doing so well compared to others was that he ran to a fixed timetable. Before this, omnibus drivers would just wait till the seats were all full before leaving and making it impossible for passengers to know when they were going to arrive at their destination. Thomas's buses stopped at designated stops rather than just wherever the driver or passenger wanted. Thomas made sure his omnibuses left on time, whether they were full or not, which is probably why his omnibuses were so popular and he became the biggest supplier of horsepower in this time period. An omnibus horse would be purchased aged 5 for around £35. It would work for around 4 years and then be sold to the knacker's yard for £5. It was a hard job for a horse, which meant a short life expectancy. As Thomas's business grew and the amount of horses he owned grew, he needed to employ a large amount of staff to look after them all. This included stable hands, blacksmiths, coachmen and vets. He even had his own horse infirmary. Thomas had horsekeepers who would be responsible for 12 horses at a yard. Horses worked long, hard, tiring routes. For the especially tough routes, the horses would do 1 week on and then 1 week off on a slightly easier route. He had yards dotted all around, one being Groat's Mews, which was a site of stables and coach houses. In the 1890s, he was granted a large portion of the mews where he built stalls for 32 horses. There is a road named after Thomas Tilling. It's called Tilling Road. He was also known to have yards at 36 Old Road, Shooter Hill Road, Carston Mews, Lee Road, Lee Green and many more places. Thomas also loaned horses out for the Lord Mayor Show, to the royal family, for canal barges and for the fire brigade. Horses' routine could start at around 5 a.m, where they would be fed and groomed. 5:30, a vet would check that they were fit for work, and then the day would start. The last omnibus would come back in around 10 p.m. And remember, those horses would still need to be groomed properly, not a 5-minute job, but like a 20-minute proper groom after that. Thomas was granted the honour of displaying the royal coat of arms as he'd supplied the family with horses and carriages. In 1892, Thomas had 4,000 horses. He must have had some great suppliers. Thomas died in 1893, aged 68. His business went to his sons Edward and Richard and their brother-in-law Walter Worsley. By this point, and only a year later, they were up to 6,000 horses. I can't even begin to imagine owning that many horses. Can you imagine their shoe bill, the hay and straw bill? With the invention of the motor car, times were changing. By 1905, the Tilling business had 20 motor buses, alongside now 7,000 horses. By 1913, the business had 150 motor buses, and still a fair amount of horses, but things were about to change. With horsepower being needed less and less, the Tilling horses were sold, many of them going to war work. The last Tilling horse-drawn omnibus was in 1914. And an interesting fact I found out was that they actually had a riding school. It was called Tilling's Riding School, and it was in Melham Road, Peckham. And I actually saw a very old advert for it, which it said it was a good place to keep fit by riding. And there was a special introduction given for those wanting to ride either military or civilian. And I literally have this one picture that you can see on the screen, and I don't know any more about it. I don't know how long it was open for, when it first opened, when it closed, or anything like that, but there was a Thomas Tilling riding school. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it's really short. I wish I could have found out more information on Thomas Tilling. I find him absolutely fascinating, and what an empire he built. And maybe he was in the right place at the right time, but he obviously also was very driven. You know, he started off as a cow worker and obviously had big dreams, taking his wife to London and their grey mare Kitty, and starting up, and you know, from going from that one mare to in Thomas's lifetime having 4,000 horses, and then into his son's lifetime and they had 7,000 horses at one point. Like, I can't even comprehend that. 7,000 horses. I don't know how you'd keep on top of it all, like all your stable hands and the blacksmiths and the bills must have been just coming in constantly. But you know, they obviously had done very well, and also they moved with the times. They knew that, you know, they were going to have to invest in sort of, you know, motor buses and all that, and they did. It was incredibly successful. But I just would love to have been a fly on the wall and seen all these little stable yards dotted around, tucked in behind places that had all these stalls and horses in them, and it would have been amazing to see, wouldn't it? The other thing that I find fascinating is the constant renewal of horses, because, you know, these horses didn't last very long, sadly. It was such a tough life. So they must have had a constant flow of new horses coming in. I mean, you know, were they buying them from farms in the countryside? Were they bringing them over from Ireland? I don't know. I need to investigate that more, but I'm sure one of you guys will know. But it must have been just a constant flow of new horses coming in, and of course those horses had to be trained as well. And you know, I'm just thinking about, you know, being trained up on the omnibuses and stuff like that, but we're forgetting the fact that you know, there's also the horses that worked the fire engines, and the horses that pulled the canal barges and worked for the royal family. You know, all these horses had to be trained. So it's incredible, isn't it, what they achieved? Absolutely incredible. I am going to leave the video there, guys, because my fingers are literally about to drop off. I need to put my gloves back on, and see you again soon with another video.